Okay, again, welcome everybody to our TMN Tuesday April event. We're gonna get started here. I show 12 o'clock on my clock here in the office. Michelle, if you want to get us started with our tech check this morning.
I show it's still 11:58, but we can get started a little early and get some of the tech stuff out of the way. Welcome again to our April TMN Tuesday. Our session is featuring the conservation of insects today. And let me just do a check-in with Wizzy. How do you think it's going to be, like, right in the hour today?
I'm hoping.
Okay. Just wondering if people might want to plan on staying a little longer, but so far we're planning on this being about an hour this morning, or this afternoon already. Go ahead, next slide. So we've been talking to you as you've been getting on and logging in. If you can't hear us, check your audio. We do have it set so that the attendees can't unmute. Typically, we have anywhere from 200 on up to 1,000 or more attending these TMN Tuesdays. So as an attendee, your video and your sound is muted and off for the purpose of this webinar. If you can't hear us, hopefully you can see the screen, and just a couple items to check for tech check for you. If you cannot hear, check your volume, check your microphone, check that each of your items listed are pulling sound and volume from the correct place. Just really check your settings if you can't hear us. And the dialog box at the top, on my computer, the dialog box is at the top to check your settings. And this is typically what the pop-up looks like for checking those settings, speaker and microphone. Today we'll use chat to send in your questions. The chat can be found on, at least on my computer, it's the bottom right corner, and it's a little bubble that looks like a thought bubble. Select chat, and then make sure when you do chat, select to everyone, and that gets your question to everyone so that it can be seen, and we can hold it there to be answered at the end of the presentation if there's time. Please remember to use clear sentences. Try not to use acronyms. Several acronyms mean different things or the same things. And we want to be able to understand your question and make sure that we're relaying it and moderating it appropriately for our presenter today. And then lastly, in chat, just remember to keep things on topic and professional, as always. Lastly, if you're continuing to have problems, you can't hear us or see us, what's on the screen now won't help you. But if you see what's on the screen and you're continuing to have trouble with sound, there is a 1-800 number for our WebEx events and FAQs and a help line and content there that you can continue to do some more tech checks and sleuthing on what may be the problem on your end. And going over a little bit more our etiquette again, attendees, as I mentioned, are not able to unmute or show their screen and camera, themselves on camera. The chat function is open, and I see everybody's using it already, introducing themselves and where they're from in the chapter, where they're tuning in from today. So everyone, it looks like you've found the chat room and you're doing well there. We are planning for the session to run about an hour today, including questions. So sit back and enjoy the session. And then lastly, again, there is another reference to the help guide, WebEx help guide, if you still need it.
All right. As Michelle introduced, our TMN Tuesday topic today is conservation of insects with Wizzy Brown. I'm going to get her introduced here in just a second, but for all of our Master Naturalists, this slide always takes forever to load. For all of our non-Master Naturalists that have joined our webinar, we want to welcome you to our TMN Tuesday. The Texas Master Naturalist Program is a jointly sponsored organization between Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Our goal is to train volunteers to the betterment of their natural areas and natural resources in their local communities. And the first step in joining your local Master Naturalist chapter is finding that chapter on our map, which is on our website. And Kelly will drop the link to our website in the chat now. So if you are not a Master Naturalist and you want to be, you want to join the club, find your local chapter using the map on our website to find your local chapter. Our TMN Tuesdays are open to the public as well, and to Master Naturalists. This is our schedule for the rest of the year. We've got them on the second Tuesday of each month at the 12 noon hour. You will note there is one exception to that. October, we have moved up a week to accommodate our annual meeting this year, which will be the second week of October. So please come to that as well. And then last but not least, I always like to use this opening intro to plug some upcoming events. We have our virtual volunteer fair in just a short 4 weeks from now, May 2nd and 3rd. This is our Master Naturalist opportunity to connect with partners who are needing volunteer service to be done virtually or at a distance, be that community service, research, outreach, opportunities for you to engage with partners that you haven't maybe engaged with before during the hot summer months and do some of that volunteer service behind a computer or on your own. So we'll have more information on our virtual volunteer fair. Kelly's already dropped that link in the chat, but we'll have that information on our social media, on our website, on our TMN listserv later this month. All right, now without further ado, we're going to introduce Wizzy Brown. Should not be a stranger for many of our Master Naturalists. She is engaged with a lot of our presentations for our chapters on entomology. She is our Extension Entomology Specialist in Austin, and her emphasis includes structural, school landscape, and home IPM medical and pollinators. And I think pollinators is going to be one of the big focuses for you today. Is that correct, Wizzy?
I'm sorry, the bugs? What?
Bugs, all the bugs.
We're going to be trying to get you to bring in all of the bugs to your landscape.
I love it. With that, I'm going to give you control now, Wizzy. So you should be able to share your screen now.
All right.
And then we'll watch chat for you and holler with some questions when you're ready.
Okay, fantastic. Let me just adjust everything so I can see what I'm doing. I saw a lot of familiar names in chat. So good morning, everybody. I'm excited that you're here and willing to listen to me yammer on about bugs again. And Bob, I still have that gourd. That popped up in my Facebook memories. I think just yesterday, I had a picture of it that I posted. So I love it. It's still on my bookshelf in my house. I love it. Okay, so this morning we are going to talk about attracting insects, or I guess this afternoon, depending on what part of Texas you're in. We're going to talk about attracting insects to our yards. And, you know, why do you want to do that? I mean, first of all, bugs are cool, so why wouldn't you want to do it? But you can learn about life cycles, you can learn about ecosystems, you can attract different types of beneficial insects in there. If you think about insects overall, less than 5% of insect species are considered to be pests. So we have tons and tons of beneficials out there. And a lot of times when you're thinking about it, you need to think about the insects not as a quote good or bad bug, but where they're located and what they're doing, because that's really going to play into things. If you have a termite in the forest eating on a tree that fell down, that's going to be a beneficial decomposer. Now, of course, as that termite moves onto your house, then it turns into a pest. So it's all about where they're located and what they're doing. So we can't really pigeonhole stuff. So bringing them into our landscape is really going to encourage things like decomposers and our predators and parasitoids and our pollinators. And so we just want to build up a great habitat so we can have lots and lots of bugs in there to not only watch and entertain ourselves, but also to help balance that ecosystem out. So the first thing that you need to think about when you are planting things in the landscape is flower shape. And so this is really going to play into what types of insects have access to that pollen and nectar. So if we look on the left-hand side, that shows you an open access flower. They're also known as ray-shaped flowers a lot of times. And essentially those are large, very open, and it's going to allow any insect to get in there and access the pollen and nectar. These flower types aren't really efficient at directing pollen onto a particular insect, and so they need lots and lots of visitors for pollination to occur. If we look at our flower on the right-hand side, that is going to be a restricted access flower, and those are going to be specifically shaped to target placing pollen on an insect when it comes in to get that nectar reward. And this is going to be more accurate in, excuse me, having pollination occur. And so they tend to have less visitors required for pollination to happen. So when we're thinking about planting for a multitude of insects, we need to keep that in mind. We need to have different types of flower shapes. We need to have different types of flower colors. We need to have different levels that they're at, because some insects are going to be more low to the ground, whereas other ones like butterflies and whatnot can fly really high. And so they may perch on taller things so they can kind of keep an eye on things. You also want to make sure that you have a variety of bloom periods. Typically, when we're thinking about insects in the landscape, we really want to target bloom periods spring through fall. We're not so much worried about winter because insects really should be going through diapause or kind of hiding in cracks and crevices, and they're really not going to be as active at that point in the year. They may come out on warm days to have some activity, but we're not worried so much about providing them food during that period of time. So spring through fall is really what we need to focus on. And then we want to make sure that when we do plant things in the landscape, that we are going to plant them in clumps. It's better if you cluster either the same or very similar plants together, and it makes it easier for the insects to find those particular plants because they're going to use certain cues to come and find those plants, with a general shape being one that they'll be using their eyesight, but then they're also going to be using scents and chemical smells that are being released by that particular plant. And then a really important one, if we want to conserve our insects, is making sure that our plants are going to be insecticide free, because insecticides can and will kill insects if they come into contact with them based upon what that pesticide is. So flower shapes, if you're talking about tubular flowers, you are going to get things that have longer mouth parts, a long tongue, or a siphoning tube-shaped mouth part. So these are going to be things like butterflies and moths, and then also some of our bees are going to be able to access that. So you're going to be able, you pretty much see that in the pictures. And then of course, you know, I'm not talking about this necessarily today, but you also will get hummingbirds. When we're looking at that ray or flat flower shape, this allows a wide variety of insects getting in there. So we can have the bees, we could have beetles, and a lot of times you will see beetles. Ones that I got calls on, I'm going to say a couple years ago, was the Kern's flower beetle. And they were everywhere and everybody was worried about them. They do eat pollen, but it's not going to be problematic. And if you look at them, it's this scarab beetle that's kind of a yellowish, reddish brown color that has spots on its body, and they're just rolling around in the pollen, and they will actually carry that to other flowers and they can help with pollination. Another one that people get concerned about are flies, and I know everybody's probably very well familiarized with the flower flies, also known as syrphid flies or hover flies, and those will mimic bees and wasps. So while those are, yes, a fly and they are beneficial as a pollinator, we also have other flies that will get into nectar and things like that as well. Things like house flies or blowflies, ones that you may not necessarily associate with collecting that particular source. Oh, thanks, Sam. The food flower shapes, when we're talking about umbels, these are little clusters of tubular or funnel shaped flowers. And so this gives a larger area for an insect to rest on, but they're still going to need that kind of longer mouth part sometimes to get down into that flower. And so on here, you'll typically see things like bees, butterflies, moths, and then also you can get the flies like you see on the right-hand side. That one right there is a flesh fly. And there are also sometimes beetles, because this will give them a larger resting area to actually land on, and they can access the pollen, maybe not necessarily the nectar, but they can get the pollen. And then we have the weird ones. My personal favorite is on the left-hand side. I love Passiflora. I think they look like, I don't know, little alien spaceships. So they just completely fascinate me. But we also have whorled, we have funnels, we have bell shapes. And these are going to really be accessed by different types of insects, essentially whatever can get in there. So a lot of times, in my opinion, it's a little bit fun to watch some of these types of flowers just to see what you actually get in there and what is accessing those particular things. But typically, again, you know, we have bees, we have flies, some wasps. Wasps are also pollinators. And then you can also get some of the smaller beetles. We have these really cute ones that are kind of a convex shape that are called tumbling flower beetles. And you can see those sometimes in flowers, and they literally will tumble around. It looks like they're somersaulting around in the flower pollen. So this just kind of gives a good overview of stuff. So we want the different height levels. So you have your lamb's ear down there, and that's kind of a bottom. But we also have taller trees. We have some grasses in there. We have different flower colors, different flower shapes. So this is kind of encompassing all of this stuff. And we also have things kind of planted in clumps for this. So this is a really good design. I'm not saying that everything has to look like this, because if you think about, I don't know, insects in a greenbelt area, you know, it's not perfectly landscaped, and those insects are going to move in there and find it. So we're just trying to optimize things in a smaller space if we're talking about our landscape. So, excuse me, host plants, these are going to be essential if you are somebody that is fascinated with certain types of butterflies and moth species. So when you're looking at having a butterfly garden to see that process and see the caterpillars and the pupa and the adults, it's really important for you to know what host plant that particular butterfly or caterpillar, I guess caterpillar is going to feed on it, but it turns into a butterfly. It's going to be important for you to know what they are going to feed on in that larval or caterpillar stage, because they'll either be very specific to certain types of plants or a certain group of plants. And a lot of these that we don't even think about, a lot of the plants are going to be what people call weeds. And I'm a large proponent of growing quote unquote weeds in my yard. And I have lots of them in there because not only do I enjoy the blooms that they provide, but they also can be food sources for these different types of insects. So if you are interested in learning more about butterfly gardening and having certain plants in there to attract different types of butterflies and moths, then you can either go to the Xerces Society. They are in the upper Northwest, so they have more generalized kind of Southwest. I think we're actually in their South Central area for Texas. But they will have plant lists. We also, here in the Austin area where I am, we have the wonderful resource of the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. So you can go on that website as well, and you can put in your section of Texas. And if you do the the Pomona at the end of that link is actually butterflies and moths. So that's kind of what that's for. So you're categorizing which ones you actually want to find. And then the other one that I forgot to actually add to this slide is if you go on to AgriLife Learn, there is a online training that a colleague of mine did on butterflies and butterfly gardening. And so you can either search Molly Keck or you can search butterfly gardening and pull up that training. I want to say it's $25 for the training, but I could be completely lying about that. So don't hold me to it. All right, so if we're looking at host plants and foliage, obviously this isn't going to be everything because, you know, we would be here for a whole nother hour if I went into this in detail. We have our milkweed complexes that we have caterpillars like monarchs and queens and our soldiers. Those are going to be on milkweed plants. In the middle there on passion flower, we tend to get the Gulf fritillary caterpillars, as well as, depending on where you are in Texas, you lucky ducks, the zebra longwings. And then on, on the right-hand side, that one is showing you a black swallowtail on rue. So if you've, you know, fennel, parsley, dill, those all tend to get swallowtail caterpillars. So again, that's more of a family there. So host plants, I can't see what this says, host plants, something. When we're looking at the host plants for the adults, we're really looking at nectar. And if you think about the way that Texas is and our seasons and our bloom periods, we really don't have a hard time for insects to find nectar and pollen sources in the spring. And well, the fall is kind of iffy. Summer can be kind of hairy. So it can be somewhat difficult if you don't have anything blooming in the summertime. And then some people, I doubt many people on this call are in that category, but there are going to be a lot of people that don't understand that we do have fall blooming flowers as well. So you can plant things like mist flower or fall aster or different things. So you have that spring, summer, fall bloom period to provide those host plants for the adults that are looking for the nectar and pollen. So essentially those insects are going to use the pollen as a protein source, and then the nectar is going to be their sugar or carbohydrate. All right, so we talked about providing food. Our next category that we're going to talk about is shelter. And so the food can play into the shelter part, and you planting things in layers is going to help them with shelter. So you're going to have your low-lying stuff and then kind of your shrubbier stuff, and then you go up to your kind of grasses and maybe vines and trees. And so this is going to allow kind of, again, a whole ecosystem to be created, and that can provide the insects with shelter. It's also important to leave a little mess. And this is another one. It fits right in with my gardening style personally, because I'm not really great on kind of cleaning up everything in my yard. But again, I want the bugs there. I enjoy seeing them. And so I tend to be okay with that. But you can also create more of a mess if you want. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. Another good one is going to provide them with rocks to go under, or you can have unmulched soil areas. That can be especially important if you have native ground nesting bees in the area, because they're going to nest in those open, sunny, kind of bare ground areas. And then we're also going to make sure that we have, well, you don't have to, but you can have handmade or artificial habitats too. So if you're doing those, you do need to have them typically in sheltered areas where they're going to get morning sunlight. So this is a picture of my front yard. It doesn't look like this anymore after the freezes that we've had. So I'm kind of working on adjusting things a little bit. But you can see I try to plant things in layers. I have natives, I have non-natives. It's kind of all over the place. But I am slowly working on getting rid of the majority of the turf in my front yard. So this has been a work in progress over the past 10 years that I have been currently, and I'm still progressing with. But again, you know, getting those layers in there, providing that shelter for those insects is going to be really, really important. So this is also, a lot of this is also from my yard. So again, I said I don't mind the mess, but I do have bare patches of ground. I have 3 dogs that like to run around like idiots in the backyard, and they will run trails. And so it's one of those things that I don't worry so much about if they're wearing something down. You know, dirt is fine with me there. And you can see that I have that in the backyard where there are places for bees or whatever to nest in. You can also create something with bricks like this. You can put something on the back, or you can just leave it like that, like I did. These were just some bricks that happened to be in my yard when I moved in. And so I just kind of stacked them up and created a little space for whatever wants to move in there. Brush piles are another one that you can do. This, again, was in my backyard for a period of time. And I'm sure, you know, everybody kind of has some of this at this point after the last freeze that we had, if it hasn't gotten cleared off all the way. You do need to be concerned and kind of balance out your pros and cons of providing a brushy area like that for insects to overwinter in, because you can get other stuff moving in as well that may be problematic. And more specifically, what I'm talking about is rodents. So you can have problems with rats. So it may be that if you're doing that, you do it in a far portion of the yard and not have it up near the house. And then at the bottom, we see different, I'm not going to call these nests per se, because it's not like the adult insects are going to be living in these areas. These are going to be more of a nursery type thing. And that is where they're going to pretty much grow the next generation of native bees. And this is something I absolutely love. I have several bee houses in my yard now, and it's fascinating to watch them. So this is a sample, if you don't know, one of our native bees is a leaf cutting bee, and they should start coming out soon if they're not already flying. I know the mason bees are going to be out, but leafcutter bees usually appear after them. But they are going to actually line the tubes that they nest in with foliage. And so this is what you'll see. You'll see little kind of circular sections cut out of the foliage of plants. Usually I'll get them on redbud in my yard, and I'll get them on my roses. And that's if I see that type of damage, I'm like, this is fantastic. I'm so excited that I have them in my yard, and I just leave them there because it's just, that's promoting native pollinators, and I am all about that. So as far as native bee boxes, you can either make one yourself, which I do not do because I'm going to say lazy. So I actually have purchased my bee boxes, and depending on what space you have, what type of area you have, there's a whole bunch of different ones that you can get. But some things that I personally would recommend, or things that you can look for, is one, you need to have, depending on what bees you want nesting in that box, there's going to be different diameter holes. And my favorite, what I call my fabulous, like top of the line bee box that I bought last year, that one has all different sizes of holes for them to nest in. So I can have a variety of bees. You also want to make sure that there's a back on it. And then you also want to make sure that there is going to be different lengths of holes. But when you're talking about native bees, the females are going to be at the back. So those are fertilized eggs, so they are more genetically expensive to create. The benefit also of having the males at the front is going to be that they are then first out the following year, and they're ready for when those females emerge for mating. Another thing that you need to think about is how are you going to clean the bee box area? You don't have to necessarily do it every year. I would say every 2 to 3 years, or when it gets really funky. You want to make sure that it does get cleaned occasionally so you can reduce any pathogens or, parasitic type things that are in there. So this bee box on the bottom left and then on the upper right hand corner is the same one. It's just you can take it apart so you can clean it. You can also take it apart and look at stuff, which is really cool. The other thing, the one in the upper left hand corner that's in the tree, that one is filled with cardboard tubes that you can just pop out the tube once those insects emerge, and you can pop in another one. Other habitats that you can do, again, these could be as simple or as fancy as you want to make them. This is a general insect habitat, and it's going to be essentially whatever moves in there. So you really can't control what moves into the space, but you typically, again, will start having a succession. So you have insects move in, then you're going to get spiders or predators of some sort. And then, lizards might come in, birds might come in. This is one that I made. It's one using a big kind of vegetable can type thing, cleaned that out, and then I just used found items, pine cones, toilet paper tubes, egg cartons, sticks, shredded paper. There's just, cram stuff in there. And you can either put it on the ground, or you can, before you fill it up, you can attach it to a fence or a wall or something and then put all of the stuff in it. And again, it's really fun to cycle through with seeing what actually inhabits it and how things move over time. And this is a great project to do with kids if you guys do any type of junior master naturalist stuff. This one is a more fancy version. I took this picture last month when I was on vacation in France, and I was super excited because we went into this little town and I found the park and this was in there, and I was just completely charmed. So this is a wooden structure that they have put tree bark, and we have the log with the holes in it, and there's different leaves and stuff like that. You can also see that they put hardware cloth or stainless steel mesh screening over the front of it. And that way it's going to keep out things like lizards and birds from getting in there and accessing those particular insects. So again, you can make it as big, as small, as fancy or low key as you want. All right, this one, I know this is probably a super boring picture, but this is typically, well, this is kind of what my yard looks like right now because the leaves are falling off of my live oaks. But when leaves fall off of the trees in the winter, leave them there or in the fall or whatever. So this is going to be essentially a great overwintering space for a variety of arthropods as well as other animals. So I'm sure everybody has pretty much heard that slogan, leave the leaves. I am a huge proponent of that. This was my yard, I want to say March of this year. I didn't clean anything up until March. So all the leaves were on the ground. I had all of the dead plants still up there because if you're talking about hollow stemmed or pithy stemmed plants, there are insects that can nest in there as well. So if you can leave those in place, that's going to allow those insects to shelter there. And I usually will cut mine down when the plants start coming up in the spring. You know, that's just kind of my thing. And then if you're concerned about it, because some of these insects may take a little bit longer, you can bundle up those plants and stick them into a back corner of the yard that is undisturbed. That way, when those insects need to emerge out, they can. Another one that I did last year or the year before, I don't know, it's all a blur at this point. I did a partially buried log. So have this giant log and you can see that it's kind of at an angle and I buried part of it in the soil. And so that soil level is going to allow water to kind of wick into the log and it starts to help that decompose. So we are having decomposing wood. This isn't something that you want to do like right beside your house, but you're going to create a whole entire ecosystem in there. You're going to get stuff that's going to be under the log. You're going to get stuff that goes in the log. You're going to get stuff that goes under the bark or in the cracks and crevices of the bark. So it's just another insect ecosystem or habitat that you're creating for your landscape. All right, water. This is a huge one. And I did a video last year when we were in the drought about water for insects versus water for birds or mammals, because it is going to be different in how you provide that. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can use to supply insects with water, but you need to make sure that you are thinking about that water being accessible from the insect standpoint. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. So if we look at the right, there's one of my dogs right there. I get this a lot, you know, I have a bird bath or I have a bucket of water for the dogs or I have a pond. Yes, those are all providing water, but is it a safe way for those insects to get to it? If we look at what is on the left-hand side, that's really not going to be safe for the insects to get to it because one, that's a slick surface. Two, it's a really wide surface for the insects to get on. And three, it's a big body of water when you're thinking about an insect. So they can fall into that and actually drown. The pond on the right-hand side, on the other hand, that can be a good source of water for the insects because it has plants in it and the insects can then land on the plants and crawl down and access the water. If you have a pond that doesn't have plants on it, then that could be problematic for them to use that as a source. So these are more of a safe way for insects to get the water. Essentially take anything that will hold water and you can put stuff into it. So you can do rocks. As you can see, the left-hand, upper left-hand one was my kids. So we have some green army men in there and seashells that were collected and rocks that were collected. On the bottom left-hand corner, we have just pebbles. And then on the right, that is a auto watering dish for pets that you can use. And then I just put some of those craft glass bead things in there so the insects can access that safely. And then, oh, wait, let me back up. If you do the auto watering dish or like a chicken watering thing, it's a good idea to paint the top so algae doesn't actually form in the top of that container. And you can actually paint it either colors to match your landscape so it blends in or colors to contrast with your landscape, or you can do some research and choose a specific color to attract insects that you particularly like. So these are just some more. The top right is a downspout that I have in my backyard that I put some petrified wood and rocks in to slow down the water and kind of cause it to pool in there before it completely drains. On the bottom right-hand picture, this is from Vicki Blockman. Thank you, Vicki. I know you're on here. So when we're dealing with that, that is a drip irrigation that she has in there. And so it just constantly will have a little bit of water that pools on that little concrete pad that she put shells and rocks and stuff into, which I think is an absolutely brilliant idea. And then on the left-hand side, you know, went to Goodwill, found a container, bought it, came home, put some rocks in it, and it's going to be great for those insects. Some other ideas, like I said, the chicken water thing, it's kind of the same as the dog watering thing. The upper right-hand corner is a soaker hose that I coiled up and secured with zip ties. I filled it up with soil and then planted some plants in there. When I turned on the soaker hose, it's not only watering the plants, but that soaker hose can also provide little bits of water for those insects to get safely because it's not gushing out of there. And then on the bottom right-hand corner, we have our hummingbird feeder. You can either put in straight water into a hummingbird feeder for insects, or you can put the sugar water in there. A lot of people get concerned about bees and wasps and ants around their hummingbird feeders and what's going to happen. They're going to sort it out themselves. You really don't need to worry about it. You know, you don't need to referee it. So they'll figure things out on their own. But those bees, wasps, and ants are going to need that the source as well, because that usually happens when we're in kind of a drought type period where the bees are going to need to be fed and they're looking for food. Puddling is something that naturally occurs. This is typically done by male butterflies, and they will gather around a mud puddle and they use that to obtain moisture and minerals and salts and other nutrients. So you can create a puddling dish instead of having an actual mud puddle in my yard. I created a puddling dish. You can see that on the bottom right-hand corner. And that is essentially a mixture of soil, compost, and sand. And that is in a shallow dish that I mixed together, kind of made a little divot in it so the water can collect there. And then I stuck that rock in there so the insects can access it safely. You can also provide them with fruit, like you see on the left-hand side. I was kind of hoping for butterflies, but again, you can't pick and choose what insects are going to find what you put out. And you can see that there's a housefly on there, so they're kind of doing that. If you are concerned about animals coming in and collecting whatever you're trying to put out for the bugs, you can do something like you see in the upper left-hand corner. You can use a suet basket. And you can put slices of oranges. That one's a slice of cantaloupe that I put in there. And that's a way that the insects are going to be able to access that, but you're not going to be able to have, the squirrels carrying stuff away. Something else that I do regularly in my yard is the bottom left-hand side. I make sure that I have some bare patches of ground in area that gets regular irrigation. And that way the mud daubers are going to be able to come in and collect that mud so they can take it back and create a nest. And that's also important if you want mason bees, which are a native bee. They also will use mud to close up their nesting tubes. So we already talked about logs. I'm not going to talk about that again. Rocks are another one. So this is going to provide an area for basking. And this is a great idea. If you like dragonflies, you might want to put a basking area nearby your pond somewhere, because dragonflies are going to need that to kind of warm up to get ready to fly in the morning. So you'll see them kind of hanging out on a surface, warming themselves up in the sunlight. And so if you can provide them with a rock that's going to collect that heat, that's going to help them even more. So when we're thinking about providing stuff for insects, one, you need to think like a bug, but two, they're going to need food, water, and shelter. We need a variety of color, blooms, bloom times, heights, and different types of plants throughout the season. And then, you know, the last one, let nature be nature. You know, the less that you kind of mess with stuff, the more diversity you tend to have. It's when we start fiddling with stuff that things kind of start getting messed up, because it knows how to balance itself, but when we fiddle with things, then it might be problematic. So how can you help when you're thinking about trying to conserve insects and help increase numbers of insects? Create habitats to encourage these insects and arthropods to move into your landscape. So essentially, everything that we just talked about. If you want to help the public, a big thing there is education. And you, as volunteers of Texas A&M, you have that ability to go out there and talk to people and encourage them to not think that insects are terrible. A lot of people think, you know, they're just gross and they don't like them, and they don't think about, oh, well, we need decomposers, we need pollinators, we need those predators. And even if it's somebody who just wants, well, I want ladybugs in my yard, well, you're going to need to have aphids that are feeding on the plant to draw in the ladybugs to eat the aphids. So you can't have everything pristine in the garden with zero insects, because that's not going to work out. So encourage them to encourage bugs in their landscape. So how-to presentations, like I just gave, give them some ideas. You can even, if you don't want to do an actual PowerPoint, get some of these things to show them. Get some of the bee houses. You can have a bee house workshop where you're actually teaching them how to make their own stuff, or an insect sheltering habitat. You know, get some cans and other containers and let them make a house and put it wherever in their landscape. So these are great ideas for, you know, outreach opportunities if you're having booths someplace to kind of get that word out. For helping extension agents, again, education. I'm going to talk a minute about where all of our entomologists are within the state. And a lot of our entomologists that we have aren't necessarily dealing with homeowners. So they are going to be dealing more on the crop side. But these are things that we're really going to need to think about, where we can educate our agents and help them educate others about encouraging these habitats. If you have a demonstration garden, incorporate some of these into that demonstration garden and maybe put signage up. Or if you have a day where people come out to tour the garden, you know, explain to them, here's why we have this water source here, and this is why we have it in this particular way, or here's a bee house, or, you know, just different things. Why do we have bare soil? You know, this is where we're hoping to attract some native bees. So making sure that you're explaining that stuff and why, the why behind we have the stuff. Because I know I have in my yard, I have a lot of the insect watering dishes, and I have a neighbor down the street that always walks past my house, and she saw me one day when I was in the yard working in the garden, and she was just like, you know, I was always wondering why you had that bowl with a rock in it that had water. And she's like, I heard a spot that you did on the radio that said that that's how you're providing water for insects. And it just totally made sense to me. So it's one of those, you know, explain why you're doing it, because if they see a bowl with a rock in it that has some water, it's like, well, what is that for? But if you explain it, it's like, oh, okay, we have the aha moment. So citizen science projects, these are other things that you can get involved in. And I just got an email this morning from the Xerces Society with different projects they have. So there's some links on there that link to different types of insect related projects. There's also Monarch Watch. There's Bumblebee Watch that you see on there. Some cities have the Bee City. I know that Austin has one that Vicky is part of and I'm part of. There is a new, I don't know if it's new. There's one, if you like fireflies or lightning bugs, depending on where you grew up. There's a citizen science project that you can do that tracks fireflies within North America. Bee Burst collects information about honeybees and bumblebees in, oh, that's in Illinois. There's butterfly monitoring with the Monarch Watch, the Journey North, North American Butterfly Monitoring Network. There's an, if you like odonates, like dragonflies and damselflies, there's a citizen science project that works on those, essentially with photographic records of where they're located. So there's a ton of stuff. And if you need more links, then please shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to send those to you. I do want to also mention that we have a Master Volunteer Advanced Training. I know a lot of you on this particular webinar have taken it. We are going to be doing it again in the fall of 2023. Registration is not open yet. It will be virtual, and this year it is actually headed up by Molly Keck. There will be over 20 hours of advanced training, and it's strictly on entomological topics. And you can then certify and get a entomology specialist pin, which you see a mock-up on the right-hand side. But you need to have 20 hours of a dedicated entomology-based project within a year of you taking the training. So I know a lot of people, we used to do this in person, and I know a lot of people are concerned about why we went virtual. We went virtual because we had COVID and everything was on lockdown. And so we were doing the best that we can, but we actually discovered that when we do the virtual training, we can offer it to more people across the state of Texas. Instead of having 20 people in a class at a time, we can have about 90 people in a class. The other thing that we can do is we can record them. And so you can actually watch the videos if you can't necessarily attend live. And then the other thing, I forgot my train of thought. We did the virtual, more people. Oh, and we could reach different areas of Texas. So since it was just Molly and I for a long time, it was like Austin, San Antonio. And if you were in the outer parts of Texas, it might be really difficult for you to get to this particular area. And so now we can get people from El Paso or the Panhandle or the Valley, and it's easier for them to access that training because you can do it from your own home and you don't have that extra cost of traveling and staying in a hotel and feeding yourself and all of that. So here are our entomology groups. So this is our extension entomologist, and these guys are going to basically be specialized in different things. They are pretty much, well, all over the state. So we have Amarillo, we have Lubbock, Stephenville, Overton, College Station, and Corpus Christi. And these guys go anywhere from crop type entomologies where they're working on specific crops to Dr. Sonia Swiger deals with livestock entomology. Dr. Rafia Khan deals with nursery and landscape topics. Dr. Robert Puckett does things that are urban related. So we have a whole variety of things. On top of that, we also have our extension program specialists, which I am one. So I am in Austin. Molly Keck is in San Antonio. We have Greg Wilson in San Angelo, Matt Matoka in Thrall. And then in Dallas, we have Janet Hurley, who specializes in school IPM, and then Bryant McDowell, who is kind of Molly and my counterpart in the Dallas area. And then on top of that, we have our IPM agents. And depending on, you know, which one you're dealing with, they do deal with questions from, I guess, homeowners and the general public, but a lot of these are going to be focused mainly on helping farmers with their crops. And that's why they're located in the areas where they are, because they're going to have specific crops that they are assigned. So we have, that's Joel instead of, I forgot his L, but you can see we have a variety of them as well, kind of all across the state. So fortunately, with the entomology group, we are kind of hiring lately. We were kind of on a downward trend for a while, but now we're actually getting some people back, and our group is kind of getting back to a decent size. So we're covering more spaces. And that question, IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management. So this is my information. So even if you aren't in my area, please feel free to contact me. And I know a lot of you utilize me for your entomology intern trainings, and I'm more than happy to do those. If you are someplace that is out of my driving range and you are willing to do something by Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever, contact me and see if I can check my calendar to see if I have availability for your trainings in the future. But we do have 2 podcasts if you're interested in those. So if you haven't gotten enough bugs quite yet, then you can tune in to our podcasts, and you can also follow me on social media to get my little video clips. All right. I am going to stop sharing and then open up the chat.
Wonderful. Lizzie, there's a lot of kudos coming in, and what a great presentation today. I do have some of the questions ready for you if you want me to.
Oh, fantastic. Go for it. That makes my life easy.
I'm going to summarize a few of them. There was a few questions that were asked as you were talking about the watering structures, how to limit biting pests. So you
like mosquitoes?
Mosquitoes.
I get that one all the time.
How to limit some of those when you're trying to attract the good ones. How do you not attract the not good ones?
So if you're watering them and you're concerned about mosquitoes, one, you can use the mosquito dunks, which is the Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, and those only are going to affect the larvae that are in the water of mosquitoes, midges, or black fly larvae. So they're not going to affect other things. The other thing, and this is what I do in my particular yard, is my dishes are usually fairly shallow. And so that water tends to dry out quickly, and then I can just fill it back up. And so those mosquitoes don't have a chance to cycle through. You essentially need 5 to 7 days for those mosquitoes to go from egg to adult. So if you're not having that water dry out that you would need to refill it on a weekly basis, then you can dump it and then put new water in it within that time period.
Michelle, did you find some questions that you want to ask?
There's one here that's been kind of repeated a couple times. Does ant bait poison kill other insects?
I'm assuming you're talking about fire ant baits. That would be my assumption. So fire ant baits can kill other insects. The thing with fire ant baits is when you put them out, fire ants, and why they are so successful, they're very good at exploiting resources, which is kind of why they move or force other ants out of the area, because they're the ones that are taking all the food and they're getting the water and the space and all of that stuff. So when you put that fire ant bait out, those fire ants are usually going to be the first ones on the scene, and they're going to pick it all up. And so while other ants can pick it up and eat it, and that would kill them, that's generally not what happens. I have been doing a community-wide fire ant baiting program in the neighborhood that I live in since 2005. So we will bait for fire ants twice a year in spring and fall. When we first started this project in 2005, I was finding maybe 3 other ant species within the neighborhood. when we had the fire ant population unmanaged. And now that we're managing it, I find anywhere from 7 to 12 species of ants. So when you manage the fire ants, it allows those other ants to kind of move in and use those resources.
That's great. I have another set of questions that have come in about your bee houses. The two questions here are, can you share some of your sources for your bee houses that you've purchased? Safe products that, if there's any sort of safe versus unsafe bee house considerations. And then you mentioned cleaning, and the question was, what time of the year do you suggest to clean the boxes?
Okay. For the bee houses, my favorite bee house that I got was from Crown Bees, and I absolutely love it. They also sell, well, you can buy the bees, but we really don't need to because we have them here. They also have pheromones. They have reeds that you can use to stick in the houses. And my suggestions for the bee houses, make sure that you put them in a sheltered location that is protected from wind and rain, that they are attached to a steady surface and not swinging around, and that they're going to get morning sun. If you're cleaning them, what I would recommend is, for me, this is something that I kind of am switching over to either reeds or cardboard tubes for mine, because it makes it easier. I don't have to go in there and scrub it with a brush or anything. I could just pop out that tube once the bees have emerged and put a new one in. But for cleaning, it's really going to depend on the bees because they will emerge at different times of the year. So you just got to watch the end of the tube, and when the hole is open, then, you know, you're good to go.
Watch and look. There's quite a few questions in the chat as well about the entomology specialist training. So I know that information is not available, or not, the registration's not out yet for that, but when it is, Wizzy, would you send it to me so that we can send it out to all of our master naturalists?
Yes, yes. We usually send it to y'all, and then Jayla Fry for the master gardeners. So yes,
Okay.
they're more than happy to do so.
Sure.
And I would suggest, if you are interested in the entomology training and you know that you want to take it, I would sign up as soon as possible. My training that I did last year filled up within about a week and a half.
Awesome. Wonderful. Michelle, is there any other questions that you see? We're kind of running on the time. No? Okay. For Wizzy and for everybody else on the call, thank you guys for joining us for our TMN Tuesday, April. Wizzy did share her PowerPoint. I've put it in the chat a few times, so there's been a lot of links shared, and we'll make sure that we have all of those on the website if they're not there already. She also shared some resources, some documents that you guys can use, as well as your PowerPoint slides. So if you've got questions on things that she talked about today, we'll have that on the website as well. So thank you, Wizzy, so much for a very entertaining presentation. One of the comments that I saw come in said, Rick Travis said, "All right, I'm on my way outside right now." he was fired up, ready to go work in his yard. So great. Well, thank you. I appreciate everything.
Sure. Thank you, everyone.